Imagine a situation where a hostage rescue couldn't involve a direct assault. No choppers, no explosions, just pure, silent ingenuity. We've all seen the movies where elite teams crash through windows, but in the real world of high-stakes espionage, that's often the quickest way to get everyone killed. How do you extract high-value targets from under the noses of heavily armed captors without firing a single shot? This is the story of an operation so discreet, it redefined what was possible. The year was 1979. The location, Tehran, Iran. The world watched as a massive embassy was overrun, but amidst the chaos, 6 American diplomats managed to slip out a side door. They weren't captured, but they weren't free. They were ghosts hiding in the home of the Canadian ambassador. Outside, the city was a boiling cauldron of revolution. If they were discovered, it wouldn't just be a kidnapping, it would be a public execution. Back in Washington, the Situation Room was a place of desperation. Military planners looked at every option. A Delta Force raid? The distance was too great. A midnight extraction by van? The checkpoints were too frequent. Every traditional soldier solution ended in a red X on the map. They needed someone who didn't think in terms of bullets, but in terms of belief. That person was Tony Mendez, a CIA exfiltration specialist. Tony didn't look like a spy. He looked like an artist, because in many ways, he was. He specialized in identity. He knew that if you give a person a convincing enough reason to exist, the world will usually let them pass. He looked at the 6 hiding diplomats and realized they couldn't leave as Americans. Now they had to leave as someone else entirely. The plan Tony proposed was so audacious, it was almost laughed out of the room. He wouldn't send in a rescue team. He would send in a production team. He set up a fake film studio in Hollywood called Studio 6. He bought full-page ads in Variety magazine for a fake sci-fi movie called Argo. He wanted the world to believe that a Canadian film crew was scouting locations in the desert. Intelligence isn't just about secrets, it's about details. Analysts spent weeks creating deep backstories. They didn't just give the diplomats fake passports, they gave them fake lives. They had to learn the lingo of the film industry, how to handle a camera, how to talk about storyboards, and how to act like arrogant Hollywood elite. One mistake, one stumble over a technical term, and the illusion would shatter. Tony Mendez landed in Tehran alone. He carried with him the most dangerous luggage in history, 6 Canadian passports and a stack of movie scripts. The city was on high alert. Young Revolutionary Guards were everywhere, their eyes scanning every foreigner for signs of suspicion. Tony checked into his hotel, knowing that every move he made was likely being watched. The drive to the Canadian ambassador's house was the first test. As Tony passed through the city, he saw the tension in the streets. He wasn't just a man in a car. He was a bridge between life and death for 6 people he had never met. He knew that the guards at the airport were already suspicious of anyone trying to leave. When Tony finally met the 6 diplomats, the room was thick with fear. They had been trapped in a basement for months. He laid the scripts on the table and told them the truth. You aren't diplomats anymore. You're a film crew from Vancouver. The look on their faces wasn't relief, it was pure terror. They weren't actors. They were terrified public servants being asked to give the performance of their lives. The next 48 hours were a grueling rehearsal. Tony acted as the interrogator, screaming questions at them, trying to make them crack. He made them practice their Hollywood personalities until it was second nature. They had to learn to look bored, not scared. They had to look like people who were annoyed by the heat, not people fleeing for their lives. The morning of the extraction, the air was cold. They piled into a small van. As they drove toward Mehrabad Airport, the city was waking up. They passed armed patrols and angry crowds. Inside the van, there was total silence. Each of the 6 was clutching a folder of concept art for a movie that didn't exist. At the airport, they reached the final checkpoint. This was the cat and mouse game. A guard looked at their documents. He was young, suspicious, and held a rifle. He looked at the producer, then at the passport. He began to ask questions. Why would anyone want to film a movie in the middle of a revolution? Tony played his part perfectly. He handed the guard the glossy movie brochures. He talked about locations and cinematography. The guard, confused by the Hollywood jargon, hesitated. He went to a back room to make a phone call to the studio in Los Angeles. Thousands of miles away, a CIA officer sat by a ringing phone, ready to play the part of a studio secretary. The phone rang, and it was answered. The lie held. The guard returned and handed back the passports. "Proceed," he said. The group walked across the tarmac. Every step felt like an hour. They could see the Swissair jet waiting for them, but they could also see the guards watching them from the towers. They didn't run. They didn't look back. They boarded the plane like regular travelers. The plane took off. For 30 minutes, there was no talking. They watched the Iranian coastline disappear beneath the clouds. It wasn't until the pilot announced they had crossed into Turkish airspace that the diplomats began to weep. The specialist, Tony Mendez, simply closed his eyes. The movie was over. The world wouldn't know the truth about this operation for nearly 20 years. It remained a classified secret, a ghost story in the halls of the CIA. It proved that in the most dangerous situations, the most effective weapon isn't a gun, it's the human mind. 6 people were saved not by an army, but by a story.